put this on Facebook. So welcome everybody. Hello. Sorry to interrupt your conversations. Good to see all of you. Just so you all know, we are on Facebook as well. We've got some folks that are watching through the Facebook stream, and so they're going to participate via some comments maybe. We shall see. Right? We shall see. Hello, Miss Rachel. So welcome to our town hall. As all of you know, I am Jim Hoffman. I have the privilege of being pastor here at St. John's. I want to thank you for coming to spend a little bit of time with us in this conversation regarding some of the changes in the language for our ruling book of discipline for the United Methodist Church and how that impacts us as a congregation, some conversation that we need to have and some decisions that we will eventually have to make. So. For those of you that maybe are a little bit new to this, I'm going to do some quick history just to bring us all up to why we had to even have this kind of a conversation as a church. Most of you probably remember in 1968 from just your history lesson, you may not have been around in 1968, but from history, the Methodist Church and the Evangelical United Brethren Church merged in 1968. And they formed the largest denomination in all of the world that was called the United Methodist Church. So that's how we came to be. It was in 1968. Now, in 1968, there was also a group called the Good News Movement that formed within the United Methodist Church. The Good News Movement, a very traditional group of folks that had a really strong traditional stand on human sexuality, marriage, and ordination, and wanted to preserve that kind of understanding. 1972, when General Conference met again, so General Conference meets every 4 years for the church worldwide. 1972, they started adding restrictive language. Restrictive language to the office of the pastor, restrictive language for boards of trustees, and restrictive language for the annual conference board of ordained ministry, having to do with human sexuality. All right? So I'm going to read you a little bit of what is in the Book of Discipline. This is the 2016 version because we carried this language for 50 years. 50 years we carried this language. And it's in our Book of Discipline. So I'm going to read it to you a little bit. We're going to start with the mission of the church, which is paragraph 120. So anybody want to know what the Book of Discipline is? It is our rule book. Got to have rules, right? And this is our rule book, right? So our mission, according to the United Methodist Church that we've had for the last 50 years, the mission of the church is to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. Local churches and extension ministries of the church provide the most significant arenas through which disciple making occurs. Here's the rationale that they give. The mission of the church is to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world by proclaiming the good news of God's grace and by exemplifying Jesus' command to love God and neighbor, thus seeking to fulfill God's reign and realm in the world. The fulfillment of God's reign and realm in the world is the vision of Scripture that is held before us, and the United Methodist Church affirms that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, the Savior of the world, and the Lord of all. And as we make disciples, we respect persons of all religious faiths, and we defend religious freedom for all people. The mission of the church is our grace-filled response to the reign of God in the world announced by Jesus. So that's kind of our mission, our rationale for our mission. Then you get over to paragraph 121. That's the preamble, to the mission. Then you get over to paragraph 140, which I find interesting. Because in paragraph 140 is the call to inclusiveness in our church, which says, we recognize that God made all creation and saw that it was good. And as a diverse people of God who bring special gifts and evidence of God's grace to the unity of the church and to society, we are called to be faithful to the example of Jesus' ministry to all persons. Inclusiveness means openness, acceptance, and support that enables all persons to participate in the life of the church, the community, and the world. Therefore, inclusiveness denies every semblance of discrimination. Remember I said this is the 2016 Book of Discipline, right? The service of worship of every local church of the United Methodist Church shall be open to all persons. The mark of an inclusive society is one in which all people in which all persons are open, welcoming, fully accepted and supporting of all other persons, enabling them to participate fully in the life of the church, the community, and the world. And a further mark of inclusiveness is the setting of church activities and facilities accessible to persons with disabilities. In the United Methodist Church, inclusiveness means the freedom for the total involvement of all persons who meet the requirements of the United Methodist Book of Discipline for membership and leadership of the church at any level and every place. That's our call to inclusiveness. And then you get to paragraph 161G, which is human sexuality. We affirm that sexuality is God's good gift to all persons. We call every person to responsible stewardship of that sacred gift. And all persons are sexual beings, whether or not they are married, in sexual relationships, and are confirmed as monogamous, heterosexual in their marriage. So, we affirm that all persons are individuals of sacred worth created in the image of God. However, the United Methodist Church does not condone the practice of homosexuality. It considers this practice incompatible with Christian teaching. 2016 Book of Discipline, all right? So, there's where our inclusiveness begins to have some boundaries around it, some borders, all right? We do not consider human sexuality, when it comes to homosexuality, to be consistent with the practice of Christian teaching. All right, so then you get to paragraph 304, qualifications for ordination. Sorry, I'm jumping through these pages. Thank you for bearing with me. Paragraph 304.3 says this: while persons set apart by the church for ordained ministry are subject to all the frailties of the human condition and the pressures of society, they are required to maintain the highest standards of holy living in the world. The practice of homosexuality is incompatible with Christian teaching. We've said that twice now in the Book of Discipline. Therefore, self-avowed practicing homosexuals are not to be certified as candidates, ordained as ministers, or appointed to serve in the United Methodist Church. Right? How many of you have heard of Bishop Karen Oliveto? A couple of you. Bishop Karen Oliveto, self-avowed, practicing homosexual, lesbian, married to another woman. She is in the Pacific Northwest, Blue Sky, Colorado area, was ordained, and then was elevated to the office of bishop under this Book of Discipline. Now you see why this is breaking down even further as a church, right? Now when you get to marriage and the social principles, we read a little bit about that. I think, did I read 161C? I'll read that to you real quick. So we've got life of the church. We've got ordination. In 161.C in the social principles, it says this. We've already read that. No, C. Yeah, C. Nope, we read that. G. We read that. And so we've talked about marriage as well. So we've talked about marriage and ordination. Can't do it in the church. And then you get to 341. This is authorized conduct in the church and unauthorized conduct in the church. 341.6 says this: ceremonies that celebrate homosexual union shall not be conducted by our ministers and shall not be conducted in our churches. So we talked about inclusiveness that now has guardrails, particularly when it comes to ordination and it comes to marriage, and who can get married and who can marry, and where they can get married. Right? And this was part of our language for a really long time. Oh, by the way, there's a remedy to this as well. So if someone gets charged with doing this under the 2016 Book of Discipline, here's what it says. I thought you always got to talk about the penalties to these things, right? So 2702, point 1. A bishop, clergy member of an annual conference, local pastor, or clergy on honorable or administrative location, or a diaconal minister may be tried with charges subject to the statute of limitations with one or more of the following offenses, if they commit one or more of the following offenses: immorality, including but not limited to, and not being celibate in singleness, or not faithfulness in heterosexual marriage. Practices declared by the United Methodist Church to be incompatible with Christian teachings, including but not limited to being a self-avowed practicing homosexual, or conducting ceremonies with celibate homosexual unions, or performing same-sex weddings. Crime, disobedience to the order and the discipline of the book of the United Methodist Church, dissemination of doctrines contrary to the established doctrines of the United Methodist Church, relationships and or behaviors that undermine the ministry of the pastor, child abuse, sexual misconduct, including the use of possession of pornography, harassment, including but not limited to sexual and or racial harassment, racial or gender discrimination, or fiscal malfeasance. Which means, if you get caught doing any one of these things, a church member or another clergy member or your district superintendent or the bishop, whatever, they can actually bring charges against you, and there is a formal judicial process in the United Methodist Church by which you would go through a church trial. All right? And that trial can go on in a variety of different ways. Francis Schaeffer comes to mind. Francis Schaeffer was a pastor in the East Coast area. His son wanted to get married. His son wanted a same-sex union. Francis Schaeffer presided over that union, and Francis Schaeffer was brought up on charges, and his ordination and credentials were taken away from him because of that. Okay? All right. Anybody got any questions so far about the 2016 Book of Discipline? Just to let you know, that was in effect all the way until 2020. All right? Actually, it was in effect until 2024. What happened in 2020? COVID, which meant our 2020 General Conference did not take place. So we did not have a church-wide gathering because people couldn't travel, particularly from international spaces, to be able to get here. So we had to live under this 2016 Book of Discipline, not 4 years, but 8 years. All right, so 2024 comes around, and we have General Conference, and at General Conference, there is a large amount of conversation about these particular things and changes that they wanted to have happen. Now, let me set the stage for you. At General Conference, there are 862 voting delegates. 862. 59.9% of those are from the United States, 32% are from Africa, 6% from the Philippines, 4.6% from Europe, Asia, and then some others who have ties to the United Methodist Church. They speak French, English, Portuguese, among other many languages. So there's a lot of languages that have to be translated into for this to be able to transpire. Every annual conference, which Missouri is an annual conference, Kansas, Nebraska are their own annual conference. Every annual conference sends 16 delegates, 8 clergy, and 8 laity. And they're your voting representatives. They vote on our behalf. There were 1,000 petitions across 16 different committees that they had to consider beyond human sexuality. That was one of the things. There was a lot of different things that they had to consider. But the big topic, the big conversation was around human sexuality and our language in the Book of Discipline and what they call regionalization. So a regionalization plan. All right? Right now, Africa is its own region. The Philippines and the Southeast Asia are kind of its own region, and Europe and Russia are their own region. They're called central conferences. The United States is not a regional conference, and therefore the United States is having power and voice over everybody else in the world because we are a part of just the general church. So the regionalization plan is to break us off into our own region, which also would give us the ability to adopt some other things in the Book of Discipline that would make it more contextual just to the United States versus us being kind of the rule makers and trying to impose this on all the rest of the world, which is what we've done for many generations, right? So that's kind of the part of that piece. But when it comes to human sexuality, here's the changes that have happened in the 2024. So in the 24 General Conference, a proposal was brought up that would strip all of the negative language out of the 2016 Book of Discipline. So they call it harmful language, is what they called it. So anything that precluded someone from being recognized for ordination, anyone that wanted to be married, anybody that was a pastor that wanted to marry somebody, or any church that wanted to be open to somebody that wanted to be married, primarily in the same-sex relationship. So they had conversation around this. They voted on this. And if I remember correctly, the vote was like 89% passed to take all the language out. It was a high number, right? And so they stripped all that language out. You go to paragraph 120 and 121, it's the same. The mission and the vision is the same for the church. That didn't change at all. Except for the bishops decided with the connection table to put out at least a new vision statement. So I thought I'd read that to you real quick. They just announced that the United Methodist Church forms disciples of Jesus Christ who are empowered by the Holy Spirit to love boldly, serve joyfully, and lead courageously in local communities and worldwide connections. So they put out a new vision statement. Most people put out a vision statement every couple of years, right? Kind of thing. They're trying to redo it. But when it comes to the language in 161G regarding human sexuality and homosexuality being incompatible with Christian teaching, that's no longer in the Book of Discipline. When it comes to 161 in marriage, that it's only between a man and a woman, that language is out of this Book of Discipline. When it comes to paragraph 304 on ordination and self-avowed practicing homosexuals being ineligible for ordination in our church, that language is now out as well. When it comes to 341.6, it's been revised down on the unauthorized conduct, and it's excluded out of it, taken out the language on pastors, who marry somebody of a same-sex union can be charged with a crime. No longer in there anymore. That's out. That's all out, right? And then the revision to the penalties, the chargeable offenses, been revised to take out that language as well. So none of that's in there anymore in this Book of Discipline, which took effect last June 1st, roughly, of last year. And that's what the church operates under now. So, in other words, there's no restrictive language in there when it comes to human sexuality, in regards to ordination, in regards to marriage, in regards to the pastor's role, in regards to the church's role. I'm going to add one more thing in there. So late last week, the Judicial Council met and they came out with a ruling on the churches and your ability to limit what a pastor does in the church. And I'm going to read you the Judicial Council's actual words and rulings. It says, under Decision 1516, a congregation's trustees cannot declare church facilities off limits if their pastor chooses to officiate same-sex weddings. Do I need to read that again? A congregation's trustees cannot declare church facilities off limits if their pastor chooses to officiate a same-sex wedding. In their ruling, they say a pastor has discretion in deciding whether to perform or not perform any marriage ceremonies. The local church board of trustees cannot prevent or interfere with the pastor's use of the local church facilities for religious services or other proper meetings. Now, that means that if Jim decides that he wants to do a same-sex wedding here at St. John's United Methodist Church, standing on the altar of this church, and you guys all say, excuse me, no, you can't do that in our church. You can't stop me. That's what that language says in the judicial ruling. Now let me add this. Any pastor who is foolish enough to stand up and do that is begging to get moved the next year. Right? I mean, I get the idea of social justice, and I get the idea of doing what you think is right in the moment. But you are there to, in my mind, I am here to build trust with you and to set a pattern of ministry with you in conjunction that we work together for the mission of the church, not my idea of what the mission of the church is. and what I can or cannot do. Which is kind of interesting because when the bishop lays hands on you at ordination, one of the things the bishop says is, take now thy authority. And some of us take that a little too literally. We think we're the only authority sometimes, right? Which is not very smart. I mean, I can imagine myself if I was, 30 years younger, I might think a lot differently about what it means to take thou thy authority. At the age that I'm at now, some wisdom kind of has set in. Barely, but it has kind of set in. And that's why we're having this conversation, is because I am not going to just stand up there and exercise my own will and judgment outside of good counsel from this congregation. Because that's what it means to be in ministry together. All right? So, we have some conversation. We have some choices to make. Number one is we really don't have any impact on the Board of Ordained Ministries' work unless we have somebody who joins our church who is gay, lesbian, queer, or transgender, fits any of those categories, and declares themselves a candidate for ministry through our church. Then our leadership board would have responsibility for, number one, interviewing them for Christian witness and character. And then number two, if we find them to be of sound character, to be someone that we would promote and say, yes, we will sponsor you for ordination. That would be our role. But when it comes to them actually certifying somebody, commissioning them, and ordaining, that's all the Board of Ordained Ministries work. All right? So they'll be dealing with all of this. And actually, friends, we have candidates that are already in the process who are gay and lesbian. One of our pastors is currently serving at Plattsburgh that is in a same-sex marriage. So we've already made that move as a conference towards that. Ours is primarily around the role of pastor, which my prerogative in my ordination vows is I get to determine who I'm going to marry or not marry, and it doesn't matter whether you are heterosexual or homosexual. I can say no to either one. That's my prerogative as a pastor. I haven't turned anybody down yet. Still have Loretta and Aaron to go. But I don't think that's going to happen. All right. So when it comes to that, there is that. But there is also the conversation around us as a congregation. And what are we comfortable supporting when it comes to gay marriage and lesbian marriage? Are we open to same-sex unions or not? So that's part of our conversation around that. And then the second part of that has to do with a new question that is on what's called the consultation form. So every single year, the leadership board fills out a form that's called a consultation form. It's usually in the fall. And that consultation form says we want our pastor to stay, we want our pastor to go, we think it's time for a new pastor, or we don't care either way. Which is kind of interesting. You can put either on there, right, kind of thing. But you can. Now they have included a new question. And that question for the PPR board, for the leadership board, for you to answer is, will you accept a pastor that is in a same-sex marriage, gay or lesbian, queer, transsexual? And last year we had to answer that no, because we had not decided as a church what our stand on that is and how it would go. So I'm going to open this up for some question and answers to see what question and answers you guys might have, or questions you might have, and what answers I may have towards those. And then I'll let you know that what we're going to do is we're not going to take a vote today. All right? I'm going to let you guys take this home, ruminate on it, pray on it a lot, and then we will poll the congregation, members and regular attenders, with 3 questions. And we will ask for your feedback on those 3 questions. And then from there, we will determine, based upon that, the results of it, announce it to the congregation, and let you know what it is that you have determined will be our practices. All right. David, question, sir.
If a couple were to approach you, regardless of their practice, and you were for some reason, to decline to perform that wedding, but they were really wanting to be married in this church, would
Man, David, talk about tying my hands behind my back. So, there's two things that are at play in that. Number one is, this is my appointment, this is my charge. I am the pastor of this church, according to the discipline and by the bishop appointing me here. So it is in my prerogative to be able to say who can get married and who cannot get married. All right? Number one. Number two, there are weddings that I'm not available for or have conflicts with. Or maybe they have a family member that is an ordained elder that's retired or in good standing. And if they want that family member to preside over that wedding, I have said yes to that on more than one occasion. Our April wedding, the young man's father was a retired elder, David Connolly, and he came and he performed the wedding. No problem with that. If it's somebody that I think shouldn't get married, if I find out in premarital counseling that it's somebody that I really think they need to be talking with some professionals about some things, because stuff come out in premarital counseling that just causes me to want to pause for a moment and say, you know, you guys need to investigate this a little bit more. I would prefer that be a trust issue between the congregation and myself, and I'd be given the latitude to be able to do that. Otherwise, I can't think of anybody that we would really say no to, other than maybe just that kind of circumstance. You know, if you've got somebody that just kind of presents some issues that really need to be resolved before they, you know, have their marital vows presided over, I would hope you guys would trust me to be able to do that in good faith.
Jim,
Yes, ma'am.
this is a semantic thing, but these kinds of things, you know, can be changed by semantics. I thought our board of trustees were the people that managed the building and the property, and it was called the administrative council was sort of the, you know, overall thing, but the discipline specifically says the trustees. So does that mean that that group of people, because some of our board of trustees are not members of this church or not.
Yeah, so we operate under a different structure. We operate under a simplified structure, which is authorized by the Book of Discipline. And so it's our leadership team that makes these decisions.
Okay, so even though
We
it's
have a quasi board of trustees, but that group is primarily around more our facilities needs, because they have specific expertise in large facility management in contracting, things like that. So that's what they manage. But when it comes to these kinds of policies, our leadership team is the one that's going to make these decisions and would be the guiding team on that. Jack? Because Jack's on that facilities kind of thing. He didn't want that on his back. Yeah, I don't blame you. John, Mr. Rasmus.
How many weddings do you perform that aren't involved with members of the church regularly?
95% of my weddings are people that do not attend this church on a regular basis. Probably higher than that.
How do you ever had examples of people of the same sex?
I've not had anybody yet that has asked us to preside over a wedding for them. So now I have Margaret and I's middle daughter, Crystal, and her wife, Bridget. When they got married, I had to say no. I had to be dad. I could not preside over their marriage ceremony. They had somebody else preside when they got married, and that was 10 years ago. Because I don't think any of you would have thrown me under the bus, but I got colleagues that would have. So anybody who is an elected representative that goes to the general conference.
Okay, but my question is, so this new discipline, did the people in Africa, I mean, is it?
Yep, everybody that was present. Everybody that's present. Yeah. So Tom Berlin, probably he's the bishop now in the North Florida area, if I remember correctly, kind of North Florida, South Georgia area. He was pastor at Flores in Virginia for a long time and was in league with Adam Hamilton in the next kind of the next movement of Methodism, next UMC. And he stood up at a leadership conference about 6 or 7 years ago. And he said that we have to be careful about how we talk about these things in the United States. Because for us, it's rhetoric. We're talking at each other. In Africa, it's tribalism. And if you weren't paying attention, or if you haven't listened recently, there was a group of Africans from the General Methodist Church, which is the traditionalists that all broke off and formed their own denomination, in the Congo, who got in an argument with the United Methodist Church over a parsonage. And they came into a worship service and killed 4 or 5 people in the worship service. It's tribal. He said it'll do harm there, where we just talk about it in rhetoric kind of form. It's physical harm issues. So they have a powerful voice. I mean, they're part of that contingent, about 39% roughly, if I remember correctly in my statistics, 32%. So they have 32% voice. But for them, the number of them, they all wanted to stay United Methodist. They didn't want to break off to the General Global Methodist Church. They didn't want to be part of it. They wanted to stay with the United Methodist. So it was pretty a resounding yes to strip the language out.
What percentage did we become global?
I think it was around 25%. But the unfortunate thing of it is it was 25% church-wise, but a little bit larger population-wise, because it was a lot of our large United Methodist churches that went. So 4 of our large United Methodist churches here in the state of Missouri all left. Cape Girardeau, Morning Star in O'Fallon, Sunrise in St. Charles area, and then the Summit here in Kansas City. Those were 4 of our largest churches in the region all left. Charlie, I think, had his hand up first, then I'll come to you, David.
I think Jack may have asked the same question. I couldn't quite hear it. The breakdown of where we are in the U.S. and traditional and reconciling.
Well, the United Methodist Church still outpopulates the traditionalist considerably. Yeah. We retain probably about 75%. And then, Church of the Resurrection is on the move, if you have not heard that. They started a new congregation out in the Lee Summit area. They had 800 people on Easter Sunday, Palm Sunday, Easter Sunday, one of the two, at the John Knox Pavilion. They're going to be taking over, from what I understand, Aldersgate United Methodist Church, which is where Margaret and I got married and where we got launched into ministry, was at Aldersgate. So they're going to be taking over that facility. And somebody said, how do you get 800 people to come to a Church of the Resurrection? I said, well, 500 of them came from Lee Summit, because they were all disaffected United Methodists who no longer had a Methodist church. It was easy. You just show up and say, we got a new Methodist church. And they're all like, yeah, okay. My church left. So, David.
If I understand correctly, then there could be a church out there that says we do not want to break off from the United Methodist Church, but we as a church are going to say we don't care what the Book of Discipline says. We are going to observe the language that was in the Book of Discipline in 26.
Can't do that. They are bound. If you are a United Methodist Church, you are bound by the current Book of Discipline. Now, they as a church, though, do have the ability to say, if their pastor is in agreement with them, they can say, we prefer not to perform a gay and lesbian wedding, right? And that's primarily going to find itself working out more in your rural communities, not necessarily your urban context. Possibly your suburban context. I could see your suburban context being split on this, pretty close to a 50-50 kind of split in the suburban areas. But rural, more urban areas where we're at, I don't see us, having the potential of being split 50-50 on this kind of thing. Or any of the other churches that are pretty close around us. Rural churches, though, I could see them in alignment with a pastor saying, at this time, our community is still 80%, on this side of the traditional fence, even though we still are United Methodist, we're still kind of on this. Because the Book of Discipline says that you may. It does not say you shall or shall not. That was the one thing that they decided to stay away from, was the mandatory language. So Nancy and then Mr. Rasmus.
Mine's just for procedural. How the vote, well, did you say it would be a mailing, or is it gonna be by email? How's it gonna be?
So Shelby gives us the ability to poll you by email. So it'll be an email survey that you will get. So if you have a new email address, those of you online too, if you have a new email address, make sure that Jessica has it in Shelby. All right, if you've changed it, make sure she has it in Shelby. That way you get it. All right, Mr. Rasmus.
Have you formulated the three questions already?
Pretty sure I know what they are.
Can you share that with us?
Number one, are you okay with your pastor presiding over a same-sex union? Number two, are you okay with your church being used for a same-sex union? And number three, would you as a congregation be willing to accept a pastor who is in a same-sex union? Gail.
And are you doing the polling primarily just to find out the sentiment of where?
Well, yeah, I mean, so this is not an issue where you have to call a formal charge conference and do it in that kind of form. So I would take it that through the poll, based upon how people answer it, that will give us a consensus on how we should operate and what our guiding principles and values should be.
And I wanna thank you for that, because as being a former board member, when that question was asked, I know how I would vote, but I wasn't comfortable making my vote known, and because I wasn't sure how all of our congregants felt. Yeah, it was very difficult. I mean, I was conflicted, so I'm
Yeah.
so happy you're doing it.
Yeah, it'll give the